Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It is good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. The House has voted to impeach President Trump, making him the first U.S. president to be impeached twice. The vote passed in the House with the support of 222 Democrats and 10 Republicans. The article now heads to the Senate, which will consider the charge of incitement of insurrection. The upper chamber will vote on whether to remove Mr. Trump from office. Lawmakers debated for hours Wednesday on the House floor. Here is some of what you may have missed.
Every second that this president remains in office is a danger to this country and to the world. We have no idea what he is capable of doing, whether he will pardon these terrorists, whether he will go to war.
What's being debated is whether, with 167 hours left until he leaves office, is he a clear and present danger? And he clearly isn't. The president has acted substantially the same for 4 years.
The far right is calling for return engagement from January 17th.
What's happening, friends? Welcome to Dr. John Podcast right now. Trump is pushing Congress to pass a symbolic resolution to expunge his 2 historic impeachments, as if they never happened. It's a self-destructive move that has no constitutional weight, but reveals his desperate obsession with erasing accountability from the historical record. Let me paint you a picture of just how absurd this is. Imagine you get caught doing something really bad, something that gets documented, something that goes on your permanent record. And instead of accepting it, learning from it, and moving forward like a normal person, you decide to gather all your friends together and ask them to officially agree that it never happened. That's basically what's going on right now. Trump is asking his Republican allies in Congress to rewrite history with a simple vote, to pretend that 2 of the most significant constitutional events in American history just didn't occur. But here is where the story gets truly insane.
To January 20th, they're asking the president to pardon the conspirators in last week's rampage as they prepare for a race war again next week. And it's a bit much to be hearing that these people would not be trying to destroy our government and kill us if we just weren't so mean to them.
My vote to impeach our sitting president is not a fear-based decision. I am not choosing a side, I'm choosing truth. It's the only way to defeat fear.
At a time when our country needs unity, it is concerning that my Democratic colleagues have chosen to begin impeachment proceedings against a president with just 7 days left in office.
History is watching and saving the receipts. Today, my colleagues across the aisle must choose which side of a very bright line they want to be recorded on for all time.
All this comes as a defense official confirms the National Guard is deploying 5,000 more troops to Washington ahead of the inauguration next week. That brings the total number of troops to 20,000.
What should have been a relatively simple exercise in political theater is backfiring on Trump in ways he never anticipated. It's a massive, spectacular, and utterly predictable backfire that he somehow didn't see coming. Because in his desperate attempt to erase his past, Trump is literally forcing Congress to relive every single reason why he got impeached in the first place. Instead of letting sleeping dogs lie, he's digging up the entire graveyard and parading the skeletons around on national television. Every news channel is covering it, every social media platform is buzzing about it, the whole thing is exploding in his face. Now let me set the stage properly so you understand the full weight of what we're witnessing. Trump is the first president in American history to be impeached twice. Let that sink in for a moment. The very first. Not once, but twice. 2 separate impeachments with 2 completely different sets of charges. The first one happened during his initial term and centered on abuse of power and obstruction of Congress.
Meantime, CBS News has also learned that the FBI is warning law enforcement agencies to, quote, use caution and consider the use of SWAT when moving in to arrest suspects in last week's deadly Capitol attack. The Bureau included a photo of this arsenal of firearms found in a suspect's home. Nancy Cordes and Major Garrett join me now. Nancy is CBS News chief congressional correspondent, and Major is our chief Washington correspondent. Welcome. It's good to have you both. Nancy, let's start with the next steps now in this impeachment process. The Senate is not scheduled to come back into session until the day before inauguration. So what does that mean for the prospect of removal? And is there any groundswell of Republican support growing against President Trump?
Well, Elaine, just in the past few minutes, we got a new statement from the Senate's Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, who will control this Senate chamber for just a few days longer until Democrats take control after 2 new Democratic senators are sworn in from Georgia Georgia.
That was the whole Ukraine situation, where he allegedly pressured a foreign government to investigate his political rival. You remember that scandal, the one that dominated headlines for months, the one that had everyone talking about presidential overreach and foreign interference in elections. And then, almost unbelievably, not long after that first impeachment, the second one hit. This time it was for incitement of insurrection tied directly to January 6th, the Capitol riot, the attack on the very heart of American democracy, thousands of people storming the building, police officers being assaulted, the peaceful transfer of power being interrupted in ways we hadn't seen since the Civil War. It was one of the darkest days in modern American political history, and Trump was impeached for his role in it. So now Trump is back in the White House for his second term, and apparently he's sitting there thinking to himself, you know what would be a brilliant idea right now? Let me convince my Republican allies in Congress to pass a resolution that symbolically
He says that even if the Senate process were to begin this week and move promptly, no final verdict would be reached until after President Trump had left office. This is not a decision I'm making, it's a fact. And so therefore, he says, in light of this reality, I believe it would best serve our nation if Congress and the executive branch spend the next 7 days completely focused on facilitating a safe inauguration and then move to this article of impeachment after that. So basically, what the leader is saying once and for all is he's not bringing the Senate back early, and he doesn't even think that it is prudent or feasible to start this trial 1 day before President-elect Biden gets sworn in next week when the Senate comes back. And what that likely means is that we're looking at a Senate trial that would get underway just after President-elect Biden takes office. Now, how long will that trial last? It's anybody's guess. As Leader McConnell points out in this statement, the impeachment trials of the past have lasted.
Expunges these impeachments from the record. Let's just pretend they never happened. Let's make it like they never existed in the first place. And look, I get it. Being impeached twice is not exactly the legacy anyone would want. It stings. It's embarrassing. It's the kind of historical footnote that follows you around forever. You don't want that hanging over your head. You don't want that being the first thing people mention when they talk about your presidency. But here is where the comedy of errors begins. And I mean comedy in the most catastrophic, this is a total disaster kind of way. This resolution that Trump is pushing for doesn't actually do anything legally. Nothing at all. Zero. Congress cannot retroactively undo an impeachment vote. That's not how the Constitution works. That's not how American government works. The House impeached him. That happened. It's in the official record. It's permanent. It's done. A symbolic resolution is just words. It's just Congress saying, oh yeah, we're going to pretend that didn't happen.
83 days in one case, 37 days in the case of President Clinton, 21 days in the case of the last impeachment trial for President Trump. I don't think that this trial would last as long as that one. This is a pretty clear-cut case. Everyone knows what happened here. It's far less complicated than the Ukrainian scheme that he was impeached for last time. But still, it is going to tie up Senate business for a week or two, right at the start of the Biden administration.
You know, Major, you're always so great at giving us some perspective. So let's get a look at this in a broader sort of historical context here. We've had 3 presidents that have been impeached, President Trump, Bill Clinton, and Andrew Johnson. Now, all 3 were acquitted by the Senate. But give us a sense of the implications and the precedent that could come with this Senate vote, even if it happens after President-elect Biden takes office.
I'll get to that in a second, Elaine, but it's very important what Nancy just reported from the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Note again, he did not offer any opinion on the merits.
But literally, everyone on planet Earth knows it did happen. The impeachment votes are public record. They're documented. They're in the archives. They're not going anywhere. So what you have here is Trump essentially shining a giant spotlight on his own impeachments, a spotlight entirely of his own making, and trying to erase them. He's forced everyone to talk about them again. All of it comes back. The Ukraine scandal comes back. January 6th comes back. Every uncomfortable detail, every embarrassing revelation, every moment that made his supporters uncomfortable, it's all back in the headlines. And that's where the trap gets set. And it gets set in a really, really devastating way. Because now Congress has to go on record again. Republicans have to stand up and say either, yes, we are defending Trump's conduct even though he was impeached twice, or they have to quietly distance themselves from this whole thing. And either way, it's bad for them. It's bad for party unity. It's just a complete mess. On top of everything else, Trump is currently dealing with an absolutely insane amount of legal drama. Criminal cases, civil lawsuits, the whole 9 yards, court battles over his conduct in office, challenges to his business practices. His finances are under a microscope, and here he is, the President of the United States, trying to play defense by going backward instead of forward. He should be focused on his job. He should be focused on these legal cases. He should be thinking about what he's doing right now, but instead he's obsessing over his legacy. He's pushing Congress to make his impeachments go away. So the question becomes, why would he do this? Why would he risk reopening this entire can of worms right now when he's got so many other problems? And the answer is actually pretty simple. Trump has always had this obsession with legacy, with how history remembers him, with how people talk about him, with how he's portrayed in the history books. And the fact that he's been impeached twice on the record forever apparently drives him absolutely nuts. He can't let it go. He can't move past it. He can't get over it. But here's the thing that nobody seems to be saying out loud. By demanding that Congress symbolically erase his impeachments, Trump is basically admitting something huge. He's admitting that he can't move past it. He can't just let it go. And that sends a message to everyone watching that he knows these impeachments were legitimate. He knows they stick. He knows they matter. If he could just ignore them, he would, but he can't. So he's trying to make Congress erase them for him. Let me share something that really reveals the depth of this miscalculation. Back in the middle of 2026, reporting emerged that Trump was actively lobbying his Republican allies in Congress, not just casually mentioning it, but actively twisting arms, calling them up, making the case that they needed to pass this symbolic resolution expunging his 2 impeachments. At first glance, you might think, okay, maybe this is just a normal party loyalty thing. Let's stick together and rally around our guy. Let's show unity. But it's actually way more complicated than that. It's way more revealing about what Trump is actually worried about. And the more you dig into it, the more you see the problem he's created for himself. The more you realize this is going to blow up in his face in spectacular fashion. See, the thing about an impeachment is that it's not just some random political moment that fades away after a news cycle or a couple of weeks. It's a formal constitutional process, a real one, a serious one. The House of Representatives votes to impeach, the Senate votes on whether to convict. It's all documented, it's all in the official record forever and ever. Future historians are going to be reading about Trump's impeachments. School kids are going to learn about it in history class. It's going to be in the textbooks. It's going to be in encyclopedias. It's going to be taught for generations and generations. And Trump apparently cannot deal with that fact, cannot deal with it at all. So he's like, okay, what if we just make it not in the official record? What if we just erase it? What if we just make it go away? Which again doesn't work. That's not how any of this works. You can't just vote to erase history. You can't just rewrite the record. The Constitution doesn't have an eraser. The archives don't have a delete button. The votes happened. The articles passed. The record stands. Here's where this gets really interesting though. And this is the part that shows why this whole thing is basically a trap that Trump set for himself without even realizing it. When Trump pushes for this expungement resolution, he's forcing the entire Congress, but specifically the Republicans in Congress, to relitigate the whole impeachment story. And I mean like all of it, every single part, every detail. Because when you're debating whether to expunge the impeachments, you have to talk about why he was impeached in the first place. You can't just be like, yeah, let's erase those things without explaining what those things actually were. So suddenly, boom, you're back to the Ukraine scandal. You're back to abuse of power. You're back to January 6th. You're back to accusations of incitement and insurrection. You're back to the whole story about how he tried to overturn an election. All of it. It's all back on the table. It's all being debated again. All the painful details, all the controversial moments. And here's the problem for Trump. Here's where his own move backfires on him massively. Because while all of this is being debated in Congress, the real world is also still happening. Trump is still president. He's still making decisions. He's still wielding executive power. He's still doing things in office. And the critics, and there are a lot of them, they're looking at what he's doing now and they're saying, wow, you know what? This looks exactly like the kind of behavior that got him impeached in the first place. Like he's not learning anything. He's not changing. He's doing the same stuff all over again. So you get this really weird dynamic where Trump is trying to erase his past impeachable conduct, but in doing so, he's opening up a conversation about whether his current conduct might be impeachable too. Can you believe this? That's the opposite of what he wanted. That's the total opposite. That's completely backwards from his goal. And then on top of all that, you've got his ongoing legal nightmare. Trump is literally facing multiple court battles right now. Criminal cases, civil suits, there are court documents being filed left and right. Judges are ruling on whether Trump actually crossed legal lines, whether he abused his power, whether he actually tried to overturn an election, whether his business practices are actually legal. So here's the thing that really matters. All of this legal drama is basically being used to evaluate whether the original impeachment charges were valid. Like, the courts are literally examining the exact same conduct that got him impeached. And meanwhile, Trump is pushing Congress to say, yeah, but let's just forget about it. Let's pretend it didn't happen. That's not a good look. That looks desperate. That looks like he knows he did something wrong. Here's another angle that really matters and is really important to understand. The second impeachment article, the one that was about January 6th, it was explicitly about incitement of insurrection tied directly to the Capitol riot. The whole thing from January 6th is still a live issue. It's not settled. It's not resolved. There are still investigations happening. There are still trials taking place right now. There are still people sitting in prison right now for what happened that day. So when Trump tries to erase the impeachment article that was about incitement tied to January 6th, he's basically trying to erase or at least minimize January 6th itself. And that's incredibly controversial. It shouldn't be surprising, honestly, but it is wild that he's actually trying to do it in such an obvious way. Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because this whole expungement push is forcing Republicans to make a choice, and they really don't want to make this choice. Like, you can feel it. The discomfort is real. They're uncomfortable. They're squirming. They're trying to figure out what to do. See, Republicans have spent a lot of time trying to walk this tightrope. They're like, yeah, Trump is our guy, but we also don't want to be the party that defends impeachments for incitement to insurrection. You know, that's a tough sale. That's a really tough sale to a lot of voters. That's not something you want on your record. That's not something you want people voting against you for. So they've been trying to move on, trying to just focus on what Trump's doing as president right now. But Trump won't let them move on. He's like, no, we got to do this vote. We got to expunge these impeachments. Come on, let's go. We got to do this right now. And now they're stuck. They got to either fully defend Trump's conduct from his first term and say, yeah, we're cool with impeachments being raised for partisan reasons, or they got to quietly distance themselves and try not to vote, which makes it look like they don't really support the party leader. Either way, it's bad for them. It's bad for party unity. It's complicated. It's a real mess. And here's the really wild part. Even if the resolution passes, even if Congress votes to symbolically expunge the impeachments, everyone knows it's just theater. It's just political theater. It's not real. Future historians aren't going to look at that resolution and be like, oh, the impeachments didn't happen. They're going to look at what actually happened in the official record. They're going to see that Trump was impeached twice, and then they're going to see that Congress tried to pretend he wasn't. And they're going to ask questions about why. They're going to ask, what was he so afraid of? They're going to see it as damage control. So in trying to erase his legacy, Trump might actually be making his legacy worse, because now the historical record includes both the impeachments and the desperate attempt to erase them. It's like he made the stain bigger by trying to clean it. He drew more attention to it. He made it worse. Let me also address what happened during the impeachment votes themselves, because it's important context. This was a historic day, the first time in history a president had been impeached twice. But what made it even more significant was that it was a bipartisan effort to some degree. Several House Republicans joined Democrats in voting for impeachment. Why those Republicans? They saw what the nation saw and said they simply could not stand with President Trump. Some of them had voted against the first impeachment but couldn't do it again. And interestingly, there was also another faction within the Republican conference in Washington. It was essentially the just get through until inauguration conference. They were trying to create stability and get the president to do the right things to create an atmosphere for stability. The heart of their argument was that there's no point in impeaching because the president is going to leave office in 7 days. That it was essentially a process clock argument. It wasn't an argument about the underlying merits. Very few House Republicans defended the president on anything along the merits, and neither did the Senate Republican leadership, which was a persistent signal to the White House to do the right things. Denounce violence. Whether people believe you're truthful or not, do it. That was the consistent message coming from congressional Republicans. Okay, so let's actually break down what all of this means, and let me just lay it out in plain terms so we're all on the same page here. First thing, when Trump pushes for this expungement resolution, he's basically admitting something really important. He's admitting that the impeachments are a problem for him, that they stick, that they matter, that they're not going away no matter what he does. If Trump was actually confident that the impeachments were bogus, if he really believed they were just partisan witch hunts with no merit whatsoever, he would just ignore them. He would move on. He would be like, yeah, that happened. Everyone knows it was fake. Whatever. Let's just keep going. And he would just keep doing his thing as president without worrying about it. He would just let it sit there. But that's not what he's doing. Instead, he's actively working to get Congress to erase them, which means on some level, he knows they're legitimate. He knows they're going to haunt his legacy. He knows that history is going to remember him as the first president ever to be impeached twice. And come on, that's gotta sting. That's gotta bother him. That's why he's pushing for this. And that admission is actually really telling. It's really revealing about what he's actually afraid of. It's revealing about what keeps him up at night. It's revealing about his insecurities. The man who projects such supreme confidence on the campaign trail, who tells everyone he's the best president in history, who dismisses every criticism as a witch hunt, is actually terrified of how history will remember him. Here's the bigger issue, though, and this is really important to understand. If Congress can just symbolically erase impeachments for partisan reasons, what does that mean going forward? Right now, impeachment is supposed to be this serious constitutional mechanism. It's supposed to be about accountability. It's supposed to be about checking presidential power. It's supposed to be one of the most important tools we have to hold the president accountable, one of the most important safeguards. But if you can just erase impeachments, if you can just make them disappear with a symbolic vote, then what's the point? What does impeachment even mean anymore? Future historians are going to look at this moment and they're going to be like, wait, so Congress just decided that impeachments don't count anymore, that impeachments don't matter? That's a problem. That's a real problem for how we understand checks and balances in this country. That's a real problem for how we understand the Constitution. That's a real problem for democracy itself. And here's another thing that's really important to think about. If Trump gets his impeachments erased, what about future presidents? Can they do the same thing? Can any president who's got a party majority in the House just say, hey, let's erase those impeachments. Let's pretend they didn't happen. Where does it end? That's the kind of thing that actually weakens institutions. That's the kind of thing that undermines the Constitution. That's the kind of thing that, yeah, okay, it might make Trump feel better about his legacy in the short term, but in the long term, it's bad for everyone. It's bad for democracy. It's bad for accountability. It's bad for how the Constitution actually functions. Now let's talk about January 6th, because that's the thing that makes this whole situation so tense and so important and so controversial. The second impeachment article was explicitly about incitement of insurrection tied to January 6th. Congress literally voted on whether Trump incited the Capitol riot. And it wasn't unanimous, but a bunch of Republicans voted to impeach based on that charge. So when Trump tries to erase that impeachment article, he's trying to erase the official congressional record about January 6th. He's trying to make it disappear. He's trying to pretend it didn't happen or doesn't matter. And that's a really big deal because January 6th is still being litigated. There are still trials happening right now. There are still people in prison. There are still investigations. The wounds are still raw. They haven't healed. And Trump's trying to basically say, yeah, but let's just forget about all that. Let's pretend it doesn't matter. Let's move on. Let's not talk about it anymore. That's not going to fly with a lot of people. That's not going to fly with the families of people who were hurt. That's not going to fly with the police officers who were there defending the Capitol. That's not going to fly with anyone who takes the events of that day seriously. And here's the thing that really gets interesting. Right now, Trump is serving his second term. He's got power again. He's making decisions as president. And people are looking at what he's doing as president and comparing it to what got him impeached in the first place. Is he abusing power again? Is he crossing constitutional lines? Is he doing the same stuff? Because if he is, then that makes the original impeachments look really prescient. Like Congress was right to worry about him. Congress was right to impeach him. They saw a pattern. They saw a problem. So by trying to erase the impeachments, Trump's actually opening himself up to a whole new conversation about whether his current behavior is impeachable too. Which is, yeah, that's ironic. That's exactly the opposite of what he wanted. He's making things worse for himself. All right, so here's what actually happens next. Assuming this resolution even passes Congress, which is not guaranteed, assuming Republicans actually go on record voting to symbolically expunge the impeachments, then what? Well, the impeachments are still going to be in the historical record. The votes happened. They're documented. They're not going anywhere. A symbolic resolution doesn't change that. It doesn't erase the votes. It doesn't change what's in the archives. It doesn't change what's in the congressional record. But you're going to have Congress on record trying to erase them. And that's going to be a huge political issue that's going to be used in upcoming elections. That's going to be used by Democrats and critics of Trump to say, look, even Republicans are so worried about Trump's conduct that they're trying to pretend it didn't happen. They're trying to cover it up. They're trying to sweep it under the rug. It's actually terrible politics for the Republicans. And I think a lot of them know it. They just know it. They're uncomfortable. They're squirming, but they're stuck. They don't want to vote against Trump. They're afraid of alienating his supporters. But they also don't want to vote to erase impeachments because that looks weird. It looks like they're covering something up. It looks bad. So they're all uncomfortable. And that discomfort is actually really revealing. And here's the bigger picture that you need to understand. Trump is dealing with all these court cases, right? All these legal battles happening right now. Judges are ruling on whether he actually crossed legal lines, whether he abused his power, whether his conduct was appropriate. Those rulings are literally examining the exact same conduct that got him impeached. So the courts are basically doing a post hoc evaluation of whether the impeachments were justified. And if those courts rule against Trump, if those judges decide that, yeah, he did abuse his power, he did cross constitutional lines, he did do the things he was impeached for, then the impeachments look really good. They look vindicated. They look like Congress was right to act. They look like Congress was paying attention to something real. But if Trump manages to erase the impeachments from the political record, if he manages to make it disappear from the conversation, then those court rulings become the only official evaluation of his conduct. And that's actually more powerful because court rulings matter. They have legal weight. They're binding in some cases. They carry real consequences. So Trump might be trading impeachments, which are just political votes that don't have legal force, for actual court rulings that do have legal force, which is not a good trade. That's trading something symbolic for something that actually matters legally. That's a bad move. That's the wrong direction to go. He's creating a worse situation for himself. Here's the bottom line that ties all of this together. Trump tried to erase his past. He tried to make his 2 impeachments disappear from the historical record. And instead, he just opened up the whole can of worms again. He's forced Congress to relive all the reasons why he got impeached in the first place. He's drawn attention to January 6th again. He's opened up a conversation about whether his current behavior as president is even worse than his past conduct. And he's done it all because he can't let it go, because his legacy apparently matters more to him than actually moving forward as president, because he's obsessed with how history will remember him. That's the trap. That's the whole thing. He wanted to erase the past. Instead, he made sure everyone would talk about it for the next 2 years. Think about the irony of this entire situation. The man who famously said he could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and not lose voters. The man who projected invincibility and defiance. The man who told everyone that nothing could touch him is now desperately trying to get Congress to pretend that his impeachments never happened. That's not the behavior of someone who believes the impeachments were bogus. That's the behavior of someone who knows they were legitimate and can't stand the thought of history recording them. And that right there is the story. Trump walked into a trap of his own making. He set the trap himself, and then he walked right into it. He wanted to erase his impeachments, and instead he made sure they would be the defining conversation about his presidency for the foreseeable future. He wanted to make history forget, and instead he made sure history will remember this moment forever.